Have you ever wondered if those large language models, the LLMs, can actually plan things like a human can? I mean, we know they can write poems and summarize articles, but can they strategize? We've got a stack of research here that dives into that very question, and it might surprise you.
It really is fascinating how much attention LLM planning is getting.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone's either convinced they're about to replace human planners entirely or that it's all just hype. But as with most things, the reality is a bit more nuanced.
Right. And one of the things that jumped out at us from this research is that LLMs seem to struggle with creating plans that are actually usable, even for relatively simple tasks.
That's right. There's this classic AI planning problem called blocks world, which is basically a virtual environment where you have to move blocks around to achieve a specific arrangement. Researchers found that even advanced LLMs like GPT-4 only managed to create error-free plans that actually achieve the goal about 12% of the time.
12%. Wow. That's way lower than I would have guessed. So even with all their knowledge, these LLMs can't reliably figure out how to stack a few virtual blocks.
Yeah.
What's the disconnect there?
Well, one of the key insights from this research is that LLMs might be confusing knowing things with planning. They're amazing at pulling out relevant information. Like if you asked it about the steps involved in planning a wedding, it could probably give you a pretty comprehensive list.
Okay, so they can access and process information. Got it.
Exactly. But turning that information into a step-by-step plan that can be executed in the real world, that's a whole other challenge. It's like the difference between reading a cookbook and actually baking a cake.
That's a great analogy. You might know all the ingredients and steps, but without understanding the underlying logic, like how the ingredients interact or how the oven temperature affects the final result, you're not going to end up with a very good cake.
Precisely. And it seems that LLMs are having a similar problem. They can access the knowledge, but they haven't quite grasped the cause and effect relationships that are essential for effective planning.
So it's not just about knowing the steps, it's about understanding the why behind each step and how they all fit together.
Right. And to be fair, researchers have tried all sorts of clever tricks to help LLMs become better planners. They've experimented with things like chain of thought prompting, which is where you essentially give the LLM hints to break the problem down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Oh, so it's like giving them a little nudge in the right direction.
Exactly. And they've also tried React-style prompting, which encourages the LLM to think about actions and their consequences, kind of like playing a game of what if.
Interesting. So did any of these techniques work?
Unfortunately, not really. Even with these aids, LLMs still struggle to generate workable plans consistently. And it gets even more interesting when you look at their ability to evaluate plans, not just generate them.
Oh, you mean like, can they tell if a plan is good or bad? Can they spot errors?
Exactly. There's been this idea that even if LLMs can't create perfect plans right away, they could at least improve through a process of self-critique. Generate a plan, analyze it for flaws, and try again.
Makes sense. That's how we learn, right?
Yeah.
Through trial and error and feedback. So what did the research find? Are LLMs good critics?
Well, this is where it gets a little surprising. The research suggests they're not very good at self-critique either. In studies using tasks like graph coloring, which involves assigning colors to nodes in a network without any adjacent nodes having the same color, LLMs were just as bad at verifying solutions as they were at generating them in the first place.
So they're not just bad planners, they're bad judges of plans too.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty big problem if we're thinking about LLMs being used for any kind of real-world planning.
It is. And this actually challenges a lot of the assumptions people have made about how LLMs might be able to learn and improve on their own. If they can't even recognize a correct solution when they see one, how can they learn from their mistakes?
That's a really good point. It seems like we might need to rethink how we approach LLM planning. It's not as simple as just giving them more data or expecting them to figure things out independently. But that being said, there has to be a way to tap into their strengths, right? I mean, they are incredibly powerful tools.
Absolutely. And that's where a new framework called LLM Modulo comes in. It's like a way to combine the creative power of LLMs with the rigor of more traditional planning methods. You could think of it as a kind of checks and balances system for LLM planning.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Let's dive into that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this LLM modulo framework.
The basic idea behind LLM Modular is that you have the LLM generate plans as usual, but then you introduce an external critic that evaluates those plans based on specific criteria.
So it's like having a second set of eyes, an expert in the field, double-checking the LLM's work.
Exactly. Think of it like this. The LLM is like a brilliant but somewhat impulsive artist, full of creative ideas. The critic is like a seasoned curator who can assess those ideas and determine which ones are actually feasible and likely to succeed.
I like that analogy. So the critic helps to refine and shape the LLM's ideas into something more practical and workable.
Precisely. And the really cool thing is that these critics can be tailored to specific domains or tasks. So, for example, if you're using an LLM to plan a travel itinerary, you could have a critic that specializes in things like budget constraints, travel time optimization, or even ensuring the itinerary aligns with the traveler's interests.
So the critic could be like a travel agent, but one that's specifically designed to work with an LLM.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that these critics can be as sophisticated as you need them to be. They can be based on existing algorithms, rule-based systems, or even other LLMs that have been trained specifically for evaluation tasks.
Wait, you're saying you can use an LLM to critique another LLM's work? That's fascinating.
It is, and it gets even more interesting because LLMs can actually help to build these critics themselves. For example, in that travel planning scenario, the LLM could analyze the user's preferences and suggest relevant constraints for the critic to check.
So it's like the LLM is not just generating plans, it's helping to define the rules of the game.
Exactly. It's this really interesting interplay between human expertise, traditional planning methods, and the creative power of LLMs.
Okay, so this LM modular framework sounds pretty impressive in theory,
Hmm.
but does it actually work? I mean, you mentioned that LLMs struggle with planning on their own. Does adding a critic really make that much of a difference?
It does. Remember that Bloxworld scenario we talked about, where LLMs only achieve a 12% success rate? Well, when researchers applied the LLM modulo framework using something called the VAL plan validator as the external critic, the performance jumped to 82% accuracy.
Wow, that's a huge improvement. So it seems like adding that extra layer of validation really does make a difference.
It does, and it's not just limited to simple tasks. Like, Bloxworld researchers have also applied LLM modulo to more complex planning challenges, like that travel planning benchmark we discussed.
And how did it perform there?
The results were incredible. The LLM modulo approach actually outperformed existing methods by 6 times.
6 times. That's remarkable. So we're not just talking about a slight improvement here. This framework seems to unlock a whole new level of performance for LLM planning.
It does. And what's really exciting is that the travel planning case study showed just how versatile this framework can be. Remember how we talked about LLMs helping to build the critics? Well, in this case, the LLM actually identified which constraints were important to check, like budget limits, travel time, and user preferences.
So it's like the LLM is acting as a planning consultant, helping to define the problem and suggesting solutions, while a team of experts ensures that those solutions are actually feasible.
Exactly. It's this really powerful synergy between human expertise and artificial intelligence. And it really gets to the heart of what makes LM so valuable. They're not meant to replace human planners or decision makers.
So they're more like tools that can augment and enhance our abilities.
Exactly. And I think this is why the LLM modulo framework is so promising. It recognizes that planning is a collaborative process and that combining the best of human and artificial intelligence can lead to truly innovative and impactful solutions.
I can already imagine this being applied to so many different areas, from planning complex scientific missions to developing personalized healthcare plans.
Absolutely. And as LLMs continue to evolve, we can expect to see even more creative and powerful applications of this framework.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got a lot to be optimistic about when it comes to the future of LLM planning. But before we get carried away, let's take a step back and consider what we've learned so far.
Great idea. Sometimes it helps to pause and really distill those key takeaways. So what stands out to you from what we've discussed so far?
Well, for me, it's really eye-opening how LLMs can be both incredibly knowledgeable and yet surprisingly bad at planning. It's like they have all the pieces of the puzzle,
Hmm.
but haven't quite figured out how to put them together in a way that makes sense in the real world.
I agree. And I think that's a really important takeaway for anyone who's excited about the potential of LLMs. We need to be realistic about their limitations and understand that they're not going to magically solve all our problems overnight.
Right. But that doesn't mean we should dismiss them either. The LMR modulo framework shows that there are ways to harness their strengths while mitigating their weaknesses.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance between the creativity of LLMs and the rigor of more traditional planning methods. And I think the analogy of the artist and the curator is really helpful here.
It is. The LLM is generating these bold and innovative ideas, But it needs that external validation, that critical feedback to ensure that those ideas are actually viable.
And that's where human expertise comes in. We can provide that guidance, that understanding of the real-world constraints and consequences that LLMs might not fully grasp.
You know, the travel planning example really brings this to life for me. Imagine an LLM that can generate a trip itinerary based on your interests, budget, and time constraints. But then it also works with a travel expert who can fine-tune those suggestions. Make sure you're not missing any must-see attractions, and alert you to any potential logistical issues.
That's a great example. And it highlights how LLM Modulo can really personalize and enhance the planning process. It's not just about efficiency, it's about creating plans that are truly tailored to the individual's needs and preferences.
This makes me think about how we plan our own lives. We might have a general idea of what we want to achieve, but we often rely on advice from friends, family, or mentors to help us refine those plans and make sure we're on the right track.
That's a great analogy. We're constantly seeking input and feedback from others to help us make better decisions. And in a way, that's what LLM Modulo is doing. It's bringing that collaborative spirit to the world of AI planning.
So what does all this mean for the future of planning? Do you think LLM Modulo is going to revolutionize the way we approach complex problems?
I think it has the potential to re-evolve. As LLMs continue to evolve and we develop more sophisticated critics, we could see LLM Modulo being used in a wide range of fields, from urban planning and logistics to scientific research and healthcare.
It's exciting to imagine a future where AI can help us solve some of the world's most challenging problems.
Hmm.
But I think it's important to remember that technology is only part of the equation. We still need human ingenuity, creativity, and ethical decision-making to guide these systems and ensure they're used for good.
I couldn't agree more. We need to approach AI development and deployment with a sense of responsibility and ensure that these systems align with our values and goals.
Well said. So it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of LLM planning. It's been a fascinating journey, and we've uncovered some really interesting insights.
It has. And while we focused on the technical aspects of LLM planning, I think it's important for everyone listening to consider the broader implications of these technologies. How do you see LLM Modulo impacting your own life or work? What are the potential benefits and challenges that come to mind?
Those are great questions to ponder. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. As AI continues to evolve, we'll need to keep asking these questions and working together to shape a future where these technologies are used responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely. The future of AI is not something that will just happen to us. It's something we'll create together through our choices, our actions, and our ongoing dialogue.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.